when I got out to California in 1970, I was kind of let down a little bit because the Fillmore West was a ballroom, and there I was coming from the Fillmore East, which was a theater, and it kind of like, I couldn't wrap my head around how to deal with the audience when they were all roaming around wherever they wanted to go, I had to kind of like recondition myself to that. And Bill started booking shows at Berkeley Community Theater. And before 1970, there's only been one show there, which had been Bob Dylan back in '65. And this is a fantastic theater. It's 3,500 seats. I think it was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. Had great sound, big stage, So we did like a dozen shows there that year. It was really good. But at the end of the year, I don't know why. I think I just got bored again. I mean, I can't remember the exact reason, but I wanted to get away. So I gave my notice, and I left at the end of the year and took off for Europe. And went and lived in Amsterdam. Was there about 5 or 6 weeks when an old friend of mine from the Fillmore East came over and stayed with me for a little bit, and he was doing the Stones tour in England there, Goodbye England, Hello France for Tax Reasons tour. And I got hooked up on the tour, and it was a great tour. I mean, the Stones did 2 weeks in small halls. I think the biggest one was 2,000. Most of them were around 1,500. They did 2 shows a night, and it was $10 a show. And there was a dozen guys on the tour, 6 Americans and 6 Englishmen. And the whole tour was in one truck, one 24-foot bobtail, sound, lights, band equipment, the whole thing. And off we went. And it was an experience. That taught me a lot because I had signed on just to be a roadie, load the truck, unload the truck, set up the equipment, blah, blah, blah. But after we got set up at the first show in Manchester, Chipmunk says to me, "Oh, listen, I told," Chipmunk was in charge of the tour. I told Joe Bergman, who was managed the Stones office at the time, that there were a few other things you'd take care of because your experience at the Fillmore East. I said, "Oh, what?" And she said, "Well, you take care of the backstage stuff, set that up for them, and go talk to the chief of police about security. We want to be clear on that." I'm going to talk to the police. Geez, my experience with the police in America has not been good. They were the most uncooperative people when it came to concerts, rock concerts. I mean, basically, if they thought there was a problem, they'd wait in a group a block or two away, wait for the shit to hit the fan, then come in and tear gas everyone. That was the way they dealt with it, right? So we get here to Manchester, and I go over to the police station and see the chief of police. Remember, these guys have been dealing with the Stones and the Beatles for, half a dozen years at this point? And I said, "Listen, the Stones are coming in on a train. We're at the station. It's the best place to pick them up. I have a bus." And the chief looks at me and says, "Oh, no, we're not going to have them come into the station. We're stopping the train at a siding a mile down the track. And you can pick them up there." And I said, "Oh, good idea. Yeah, that's great. Avoid the whole station thing." I said, "Well, what's the best route from there to their hotel?" He says, "Oh, it's very easy. We'll have all the side streets barricaded off. There'll be no one on the road but you." And I just looked at this guy and I went, holy shit, these people don't want any problems whatsoever. And that's what it was like on the whole tour. The police were just prepared, they didn't react, they were very proactive about the whole thing. They didn't want any problems. I brought that back with me to America. So when we did the Stones in Winterland in 1972, we had just been assigned a sergeant from the San Francisco Police, Sergeant Stan Damus, and he came up to me and he said, "Okay, we got 2 shows here at Winterland. What can we do not to have any problems?" And I told him my experience in England, and I said, "You don't want any problems. What we'll do is we'll barricade every block, a block away from Winterland, so no one can even get near the building without a ticket." And he said, "Okay, you got it." And that's what we did, and we had no problems whatsoever.
Folks,
anyway,
folks, I just want to bring the audience up to speed here. We're joined by a legendary character from Bill Graham Productions, a guy who has been waxing poetic and telling great stories about just trying to keep things together. Jerry Pompili, welcome back.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know we were live.
Oh yeah, I mean, we're cooking. Can you talk about your experiences with guys like Miles Davis, the Black Jazzers? What was that? There must have been, because the psychedelic. I mean, the British invasion. It is what it is. You had the black blues players from Chicago. But
right.
There was something about the vibe. I mean, again, I just would love you to talk about the vibe that those guys were bringing in, especially because, even like M1DC band. I mean, I had David Garibaldi talking about, I guess at Winterland, Herbie's band would come in. To me, it was mind blowing, and I wanted to know, how they were integrated into the Bill Graham Productions, because, like you said in our first interview, Graham loved all music.
Right. And everything we ever did only happened because of Bill Graham, because of his insight and foresight, and stuff like that. I personally tried not to have too much contact with musicians on a personal level, because even if I liked their music, I didn't want to be disappointed if they turned out to be assholes. So I would deal with their management people and so forth and so on. But I do have a story about Miles Davis where I had a personal contact with him. There was a period in where we had an agency, a booking agency, a Miller agency, and there was a period where we booked Miles Davis. I mean, he had played for Bill at Fillmore East, Fillmore West. They had gotten along. And Miles was doing a show down at Frost Amphitheater in Stanford, and I went down with his agent from out here, Joe Bailey, and on the way back, we all rode back together in Miles's limo, and I was a jazz freak back in the late 50s, early 60s. I was one of those guys, you drop a needle on a record, and before you could recognize
Birth
the song,
of the Cool. Birth of the Cool.
I can name all the sidemen.
Yeah. Oh, I dig it. I didn't know that. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
We stay up to midnight to listen to Symphony Sid.
Absolutely. And, that's great. So I just want to be clear. It was an outdoor concert at the Frost at Stanford.
Frost Amphitheater at Stanford, right? So we're coming back, and here I'm sitting next to Miles Davis, and this was musically my hero at the time, from 10 years earlier. I mean, to this day, I still play my three favorite cuts are those outtakes from the 59 sessions of Green Dolphin Street, Stella by Starlight around midnight, with Coltrane and Natalie and all those guys.
Wow. Oh, Jimmy Cobb. Yeah, absolutely. Stuff. Absolutely.
Right. And so we're sitting there in the car, and talking to Miles ain't easy, So I try and strike up a conversation, And finally, he mellows out. He's really tough at first, but he finally mellows out. I say to him, and people must have asked him this before, and I don't know if he was telling me the truth. I told him about how I was into his music, and I named all these cuts that I was really into and stuff. And I said, why, I listened to a lot of your earlier stuff, with Dizzy and the bebop stuff and stuff like that. But where did your influence come from? I mean, where did your influence come from? And he sat back a second and he thought. He said, when I started playing the trumpet, there was only one guy that I wanted to be like. I mean, every time I picked up the trumpet, I wanted to be him. And I said, who's that?
Louis Armstrong.
Louis Armstrong.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
He loved Louis.
I wanted to blow like Louis Armstrong.
That's awesome.
He said, but the funny thing was, when I played, I was trying to be Louis Armstrong, but it came out Miles Davis. He was channeling Louis through his creativity. It was an amazing story. And every time I've worked with artists over the years, I tell them that story, to find your inspiration from those you admire and try and channel it, not copy it, but try and channel it, to be what you want.
I totally respect that line that you wanted to straddle between professionalism, not getting too close to the musicians. But ultimately, you didn't want to get to know them personally, but
I know, but I did end up working for the Stones for like 6 to 9 months in '71, so I did get to know them personally. And some musicians I got along with fairly well. Every time, Clapton, I got along very well with Clapton, Pete Townsend, different bands, a lot of smaller bands, local people here. I found, and signed Eddie Money.
Get out of here.
What? No.
Why don't you talk about how you discovered Eddie Money?
Well, I got a call from a guy from Berkeley, Matthew Kaufman, who was in the music scene over there. He said, "You got to go see this guy." And I said, "Why?" He says, "I think you're going to like this guy." And he doesn't trust, he's from New York, and he doesn't trust anybody. I know you're from New York. Maybe you and he can get along. So I went to see him at this dump on San Pablo Avenue in Berkeley. I forget the name of it. But it was one of those places you walk in and your feet stick to the floor,
Yeah.
And here's this guy up on stage, and he's got these amazing songs, and he's a hell of a performer. And he's got this guitar player that's beyond belief, Jimmy Lyons. So I start talking to him. We get to be friendly, and at one point, I was into him. I couldn't get anyone else really interested into him. And at one point, Bill got a 3-record deal with Columbia, and he had to give them someone. And I had Eddie, so we gave him Eddie. No one thought anything was going to happen. But we got back from L.A. with that initial album, and it sold 1 million copies. So
wow.
Something did happen.
No, I was going to, the one thing I wanted to ask you about was your first record, or tell me a good David Rubinson story.
David Rubinson.
Or just a story.
I don't know. Did I tell David Rubinson's story?
No, I asked you about him and I said, did you know him in New York? You said, I didn't get to know him until I moved to the Bay Area.
To the Bay Area, yeah, because he was partners with Bill in the record companies, San Francisco Records and Fillmore Records, and that was in the early '70s, and he was in the record end, and I was in live performance. So I knew David, we were friends, but I wasn't going to studio guy. I found it really tiring and boring to sit there while people played stuff over and over and over again. It was not my thing. What
about it if they, I'm trying to think back. The San Francisco Records was an incredibly mercurial label, and most of it was done in the studio, but how would you deal with a situation when somebody wanted to record live, okay, to be released on a record? Well, how would things change for you then?
No, it didn't change for me at all. It didn't change for me at all. They'd bring in a recording truck, and do feeds off of basically the board, or secondary feeds off of all the inputs. Back in the early '70s and stuff, people didn't blast it out from the stage like they do today. Everything ran through the PA.
Right.
So you took all the PA feeds off the board, and you basically had it.
So explain to me in your mind, like how you saw essentially the significance of music in our culture change, because through the decade of the 70s, you had the Keystone rock clubs, you had the Keystone Corner, which eventually was a jazz club, you had the Stones. They came along a little bit later, but why did in San Francisco specifically? Why did the clubs start to close?
Good question. Well, there was a lot of competition, a lot of small clubs, and basically Bill had a monopoly on the big concerts in the Bay Area. And basically one of the unwritten laws of booking was, if you were the first person to bring someone into a market, you basically had the rights to that band in that market, right?
Wow.
So if you brought them into your club. So what happened is, we started a club. I think the first one was, because the original Fillmore, he stopped using that in '68 when he did the Carousel, but after the Carousel closed and he just did Winterland, it was just concerts at different venues like the Berkeley Community Theater, Cow Palace, Oakland Coliseum, stuff like that. And then we started our own club, which was, I think, the old Waldorf was the first one.
Oh my God, I've heard so many horrible audience recordings tapes from that, but tell me about that. I don't want to distract.
Well, it was a good club. It was a nice sized club. It held 300 or 400 people, and it was backed right against the Punchline, which was our comedy room, which we bought from Jeff Pollock. But we ran that through till '73, and then we opened Wolfgang's on Columbus Street in the city, which was a much more intimate club. And
Wolfgang's. How long was that in effect?
Yeah.
I don't remember. God, how long was that in effect for?
Geez, I don't remember. I'd have to look it up. I guess you could Google it and look it up.
This is so important. You talked about this monopoly, and I want you to talk about people think of monopolies today, and it's very different from a monopoly. Tell me about. I don't want to break that. This is very important.
There were all these great places to put on shows, and none of them were exclusive, right?
Right.
I mean, we had the lease on Winterland, so that was exclusive, but none of them were exclusive. Berkeley Community Theater was a high school auditorium that you could rent for like $150. It was non-union, and anyone could do a show there, and people did. But for the most part, you couldn't get access to the bigger bands because Bill had that line-in with all the agents and managers, and he had the history with them. So they played for him, and he was, you knew when you played for Bill. Remember, people didn't bring their own production with them in those early days.
Right.
Only the Who brought their own sound system. So you wanted to play for someone who knew what a good sound system was and who had decent theatrical lighting and stuff, and that was BGP. But when I say monopoly, it wasn't like, we had the control of all these venues. We didn't. We were just the guys who did the shows in this area, and it was not unusual to San Francisco. In all the major metropolitan areas around the country, the early promoters like Don Law in Boston and what's his name, Larry Maggott in Philadelphia, and the guys in Detroit, and Jerry and Oni Mickelson, Jam Productions in Chicago, they all had the same situation. They basically, it was their area, they booked the concerts there. So when I say monopoly, it was just a figurative thing. It wasn't literal.
So when, and then ultimately BGP, I mean, when did things start to, because there was just insane amounts of play. The lion's share was another one. I'm not sure if Bill had a role.
Yeah, that was here in San Anselmo where I live.
Oh, you lived there? I got to come. I'm going to drive out there and hang with you. I mean, dude, that place was totally about cats that were part of the Bill Graham Presents, Sons of Champlin, Van Morrison, Garcia, all those guys would go.
They all played there.
They all played there,
Bill didn't control that place. It was an independent place, Bill never controlled any of those little clubs. They all had their own people. The Lion Jail was another place when you walked inside, your feet stuck to the floor. That's because these places only served like beer, wine, and soda. They weren't hard liquor places.
This is like I'm trying to get this. There was some kind of some sort of city laws or state laws that went into city laws that went into effect that really curtailed the ability for. Or there was a crackdown by the cops. I mean, by the late 70s, things were really changing drastically. I mean, the Berkeley Community Theater still thrived for a minute. But all those beautiful venues became inaccessible, and it almost spoke to the change in the entire industry itself. to a degree at that
Well,
point.
I think it had less to do with the industry and more to do with property values in the Bay Area, which you look at now. It's one of the most expensive places to live in the country. And you know, here you had guys, none of these guys own their clubs, they all lease them. And all of a sudden, someone comes along and offers triple the money for the space. What are you going to do? You know, you're out of business. You know, putting on shows is like, you know, a nickel and dime business, you know.
How did it affect Bill in that, I mean, he, knowing, because he was unscrupulous when it came to wanting to bring the music to the people. I mean, that's all he cared about.
Right.
But then this insane greed, how did he handle it?
We dealt with it, you know, like I said, most of the venues we did shows in were like Oakland Coliseum. You know, it's owned by the city of Oakland, basically, and the Coliseum Authority. So it wasn't like someone could come in and just buy it and triple the rental thing for anyone that wanted to use it. All that stuff pretty much stayed constant. Winterland we had a lease on, and of course they tore it down in 1978, so that was the end of that. But then we did shows at the Henry J. Kaiser Auditorium, which was a city-owned auditorium over in Oakland, and it was about the same size as and shape as Winterland. You know.
Absolutely. No, so explain the idea that you...
That wasn't the only thing that changed, Jake.
Yeah.
The other thing that changed was, you know, in the earlier days, well, the whole music scene changed, and one of the key things was the light shows. Because the light shows, when I got out here, the light shows, I mean, I came from New York where there was the Joshua Light Show, which was this amazing creative force at every show. And you came out here and there was a billion different light shows. And Bill only paid them $100 each a show, which they didn't have the money to do the stuff. And he didn't have to pay them more. It wasn't like he was being cheap. It was like, you know, it was supply and demand, you know. Guys would work for $100 to do a show. You know, it wasn't that you told them, hey, I'm only going to give you $100. No, it's like, we'll work for $100. And by the early 73 or so, I just got tired of it. I didn't feel it was working with the audience out here in a bigger venue like Winterland. And so I stopped using light shows and put in a video projection system, which kind of changed the nature of everything. It also gave us the ability to videotape bands, which you can see on YouTube nowadays. All those shows are up on YouTube.
Some of the stuff that you did at Winterland when the Headhunters came in, it was minus Herbie, but it was Paul Jackson, Mike Clark, Benny Maupin, and that's straight from, like, you know, closed circuit video from Winter, and it's black and white. And there's stuff from Germany.
Yeah, it's all black and white.
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's awesome. It's awesome. But
right,
you know, I think that's the other part. I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Did you ever see my version? The full 4.5 hour full version of The Last Waltz that I shot?
You sent it to me. That's not the DVD release. This is your own.
No. This is a single camera, black and white. The audio feed right from the board of the entire concert from beginning to end.
Wow.
All 4.5 hours on it. If you go on to YouTube and you search for Live at Winterland, Last Waltz, Live at Winterland, alternative, the black and white one will come up.
I also wonder about the you know, just making a point about the idea that all of a sudden the listening medium or our learning medium started to really change from being primarily auditory, like you talked about putting on those records, or, you know, you had the radio and you had records. Right. And then all of a sudden, like you said, the advent of high quality as it was at the time, the visual medium started to come in. Television was making its imprint. And I wonder how much, I mean, you're right, the property values, no doubt, had an influence. Right. But it's also like...
you had Midnight Special coming along at that time,
absolutely, too. Absolutely. And then obviously...
And Bill got very involved in that. I mean, they had trouble getting bands, and they had to come to Bill to put a word in and get bands for them.
What do you mean by, so they started and said, hey, we don't have any connections? How did
They
that
had
work?
started and they had trouble booking bands for it. And I forget the name of the guy that did it, but he called Bill, and Bill got him, I think, the Allman Brothers and a few other bands, to get the thing kicked off,
Wow, that is remarkable stuff. I mean, can you talk a little bit about where you were at the fateful day that Bill decided to get into the helicopter?
I was at home. I didn't go to that show. It was in '91, October '91. He went to Huey Lewis and the News was playing Concord Pavilion. I got a call about 5:00 in the morning, and saying what had happened, and it was Saturday morning, and it was just unbelievable. I went into the office later that morning about 8:00, and everyone had come in when everyone was just standing around like in total shock, and we were at the time we were in the process of redecorating the office, which is one of Bill's things. He hadn't decided what he wanted to. We had all this shit that we had framed, and we had our own frame shop, for God's sake, and we hadn't redone the office, so the walls were kind of bare, because Bill hadn't made up his mind where he wanted things to go and stuff. And I got a hold of James Olness, who was our frame guy, and he was my assistant in the archive. He's the archivist. And I got everyone together, and I said, listen, the press is going to be here soon. And I got all the advertising people. I said, start running off copies of bios and photos. Jimmy, grab everything you can and just put it up on the walls. We don't want this place to look like no one lives here. I just put people to work. I wasn't the guy in charge, per se, of the office.
Right.
But I took charge that morning.
Wow.
Because, again, it was a shit-hit-the-fan situation, and that's what I do. So...
But would you say but at that point, though, looking around, were you the longest tenured employee of Bill Graham at that point?
Yes, I was.
Wow.
And after that, that was October 25th, a week or two later, put the show together in Golden Gate Park, the memorial concert. I mean, Peter Barsotti's the one who put that together. And I emceed it, but basically, and kind of ran it from that point of view. But that was a hell of a day.
Could you just, I mean, I don't think I realized that the memorial concert happened that quickly. Can you talk about the outpouring?
Yeah,
you just talk about there was obviously people were profoundly affected because so many of the musicians, I mean, that's part of the issue today is like, everybody, has everybody has handlers today. Whereas the musicians genuinely had relationships. All of them had really good deep relationships. I mean, whether good or bad, with Bill. What was that?
Absolutely.
How would you describe that scene for arguably the greatest businessman and promoter in the history of American music?
Well, I think everyone realized, the artists, they realized that if someone like Bill hadn't come along to legitimize the contemporary concert situation, with good production values and good values toward taking care of the audience, and the safety and all that stuff like that, that their careers wouldn't have gone the way they did, They might have all been, it might have been a different story. We don't know what the story might have been, but it might not have been, it might have been a totally different story. He made it, real. I remember, working at the Fillmore East in New York. It was like we were the center of the universe. I mean, we were at the top of the heap. Everyone came to the Fillmore East. Everyone.
Everybody.
And and San Francisco is much more laid back, of course. So culturally, it wasn't that intense as it was in New York, but it still was the scene. Everyone was relaxed. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone knew where everyone lived. It wasn't such a big deal.
No, I'm as we wrap up episode 2.1 here. I just want to read this to you and let you know this is where my show has gone. This is from David Clayton Thomas, my interview with him from a few months ago. He said, Blood, Sweat, and Tears played both Fillmores. I just finished, he said, I just finished this 3-city European tour with Randy Brecker. He was with me. Also on that tour was Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull. Ian reminds me that I basically got him his start in the business. He said, don't you remember the first time you played the Fillmore East in New York? He said, do you remember who the opening acts were? The opening acts were the Allman Brothers and Jethro Tull. Jethro Tull came on, then the Allman Brothers, and then Blood, Sweat, and Tears. It all comes around, doesn't it? And it was like, that is the magic right there. That to me is I mean, how many people that had no recognition, no name viability at all, and because of the way that that Graham adhered to having this sort of completely ungenre-based melting pot of music, and how many people got discovered because of that is remarkable, really.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. Here's a Blood, Sweat, and Tears thing for you.
Do it.
In 1973, Bill had booked 2 Blood, Sweat, and Tears shows, one at the Berkeley Community Theater and one at Santa Monica Civic. I had just found, I was the guy who used to listen to all the new record releases that came in.
Absolutely.
And
you lucky guy,
most of them didn't last more than 30 seconds. But that year, there were 2 that just struck me, really got. And I walked into Bill's office with him. One was Elton John, and the other was this album called Greetings from Asbury Park.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Bruce Springsteen should open this show, you know. And Bill loved the record too, you know, and we pulled out all the stops because they didn't want anyone, I don't know, they weren't happy with it. They didn't even know who Bruce Springsteen was at that point. But we had literally forced Bruce Springsteen on those shows as openers. And
I just want to be clear, but at that point, Blood, Sweat, and Tears David Clayton was not in the band anymore.
Don't know. I don't think so. Not in
by 73, he was gone. But so they didn't even know who Bruce was at that point. That's awesome. That is so unbelievable.
Was David Clayton the original singer, or was it Al Cooper?
David Clayton was the. I don't know if he was the original singer, but I just know that by 70, I'm very much.
Al Cooper was the original guy.
I think you're right, but I know by 73. That band was operating as a strictly instrumental band. But I'm not surprised that they didn't know who... I can't believe they didn't know who Bruce Springsteen was.
Well, no, the record wasn't a big hit. You know, it wasn't a big hit. It was just a great record.
Oh, it holds up better today than it did then. But, Pompili, listen...
Yeah, well, to me, it was like hearing early Dylan. You know, it was like, God, this guy's a poet, you know.
Oh, I did. And so Bruce opened for BST, Blood, Sweat, and Tears for 4 nights.
Yeah, no, for 2 nights. One at Berkeley and one at Santa Monica.
All right, well, let's plan on doing 2.2 real soon, and I love your stories.
Whenever you want, we still have 20 or 30 years we can talk about.
Oh, we have, and I'm going to come to San Anselmo at some point when I can get the funds together. But this is extremely therapeutic, and thank you, Jerry. Much love to you, man.
Okay, take care, Jake.
All right,
Bye.
Peace. Part 2 in the books with Jerry Pompili. We will be back at a certain point this week. Not sure. Oh, yes, with some very special guests. Until then, peace.